Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Tonight I bring you a spine-tingling collection of haunted hotel tales to send shivers down your spine. Before we get started, let me take a moment to wish our esteemed friend Logan a very happy birthday. Now settle in, get comfortable, and surrender to the creeping darkness. We're about to embark on a journey into the unknown. I work at a hotel, but for privacy reasons, I won't disclose its name or location. Let's just say this place, which should be a haven of routine and predictability, has a habit of defying expectations. Strange and unexplained occurrences happen here more often than one might imagine. Of course, it's not unheard of for hotels, especially at night, to have their fair share of quirky or eerie stories. Many night staffers will tell you tales of odd things they've experienced during the long hours. But at this particular property, there's one room that stands out. A room with stories far more unsettling than the occasional strange noise or unexpected shadow. This is no ordinary hotel room. It's more like a compact suite or an apartment. Upon entering, you step into a shared living space featuring a television mounted on the wall and a small table with chairs. From there, two separate bedrooms branch off, designed for families or groups traveling together. While convenient, the layout causes sound to travel in peculiar ways, allowing people to move between areas unseen. Over time, this very detail has played a key role in the unsettling events frequently reported by staff members. Almost everyone who has worked there for more than a few months has either experienced something strange in that room firsthand or heard chilling accounts from trusted colleagues. My own encounter happened during an otherwise normal daytime shift when I was tasked with preparing the suite after a guest's checkout. I remember wheeling my cleaning cart into the hallway and methodically gathering my supplies. Nothing unusual so far. I began my standard routine, starting in one of the bedrooms, stripping sheets from the bed, collecting used towels, wiping down surfaces, and even sweeping under the bed. Yes, guests, we do check under there. I was fully immersed in my mundane tasks when I heard it, the unmistakable electronic click of the suite's keycard lock followed by the heavy door swinging open. The moment was so ordinary yet specific that I didn't even pause to question it. My immediate assumption was that the former guest had returned to retrieve a forgotten item. This happens from time to time. Without giving it much thought, I called out from the bedroom in a polite voice, explaining that I was still cleaning but would be done shortly. There was no response. I paused for a moment, waiting to hear approaching footsteps or some sign of acknowledgement, but the suite was unnervingly silent. Assuming they hadn't heard me from across the living room, I raised my voice slightly and called out again. Still nothing. That's when unease began to bubble up. The sound of the door opening had been so distinct, so clear, it couldn't have been my imagination. I left what I was doing and stepped into the living area to see who had entered. Surely someone would be there, standing awkwardly, as they gathered whatever they'd forgotten. But there wasn't. No person, no movement at all. For several seconds I just stood frozen, scanning every corner of the room. My eyes darted toward the second bedroom. Maybe they had gone straight inside. With cautious steps I checked it, but it was completely empty too. Not a single suitcase set open. Not a shadow shifted across the walls. The room didn't just appear undisturbed. It was undisturbed. Even stranger, when I turned back to look at the front door, it was firmly closed, exactly as I had left it when entering. No explanation came to mind for what I'd heard so plainly before. I continued cleaning, despite a persistent sense of unease creeping over me with every passing minute. When I finally finished and emerged into the hallway, still unsettled, I found another co-worker working nearby and quickly asked if he'd seen anyone enter or leave that suite while I was inside cleaning. He gave me an odd look and shook his head. "No," he said. "You've been the only one going in and out." And just like that, the sense of normalcy that once accompanied my duties at work was replaced with something colder, a chilling awareness that this hotel hides its own secrets, secrets I may have just come face to face with. I pushed him a little further, insisting that I was sure I had heard the door open, but he reiterated that no one had passed him in the hallway. That was the first time I sensed something might be off about that room. Not long after my encounter, another employee had his own strange experience tied to the same suite. He was working an evening service shift, delivering drinks to various rooms. At one point, He accidentally dropped his tray and the sound of shattering glass echoed harshly through the hall. Almost immediately after the cacophony, he distinctly heard footsteps coming from the direction of the suite, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door opening and closing again. Assuming a guest had stepped out to investigate the noise, he focused on cleaning up the mess and preparing a replacement tray. Later that night, after completing his deliveries, he casually mentioned the incident to a fellow co-worker, joking that his clumsiness had likely annoyed the nearby guests. But when he identified the suite's room number, his colleague froze. That suite, they explained, hadn't been occupied at all during his shift. It was completely empty. Curiosity and a sliver of unease prompted them to check the suite together. Unlocking the door and stepping inside, they found no one in the living room or either of the bedrooms, but what they did find stopped them cold. Every glass item in the cabinets, cups, tumblers, plates, was shattered into fragments. The pieces were scattered across the shelves and countertops, as though they'd been struck with violent force. Yet there was no logical explanation for how it could have happened in an unoccupied room. After hearing that story and recalling my own unsettling experience, I became far more cautious any time I had to enter that suite alone. Even in broad daylight, when everything appeared calm and ordinary, there was a stubborn undercurrent of tension in that space that made it impossible to fully relax. Over time, whispers of other odd occurrences began to circulate among staff, and a pattern slowly emerged. One particularly slow evening comes to mind. The hotel was nearly deserted, with just 2 checked-in guests for the entire night. With business grinding along at a snail's pace, management assigned me extra tasks to fill my shift. One such task involved making rounds through vacant rooms to ensure all lights were turned off, a routine effort to save electricity since guests often leave lights on after checkout. I moved systematically from room to room, flipping switches and double-checking any overlooked corners before moving down the list. After thoroughly inspecting every unit on that floor, I returned to the front desk and finished up the rest of my duties for the night. With everything done ahead of schedule, nearly 2 hours faster than usual, I expected to clock out early and head home. But my supervisor asked me to do one more sweep of the floor, just to be certain nothing had been missed. Reluctantly, I agreed and made my way back through the quiet corridors. At first, everything was just as I had left it. All the rooms were still dark, untouched since my last walkthrough. Then I reached that room. My stomach tightened as I noticed light spilling from beneath its door, a bright glow flooding out into the otherwise shadowy hallway. Confusion gripped me. I was absolutely certain I had turned off every single light in that room earlier in the evening. There was simply no reason for them to be on again. Trying to brush aside my unease, I rationalized that perhaps another staff member had entered without informing me, or that, unlikely as it seemed, I had somehow been careless in my earlier check. Steeling myself, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was completely still. I walked through the space methodically, switching off the lights one at a time, while inspecting each fixture to make sure they were functioning properly. Once I finished, I turned toward the door to leave, but just as my hand reached for the handle, the lamp next to the bed suddenly flickered back on. Its sharp, unnatural click shattered the silence, sending a jolt of adrenaline coursing through me. Startled and uneasy, I didn't linger to investigate. Instead, I swiftly exited, pulled the door shut behind me, and chose not to report the incident. I knew management would likely dismiss it as a minor electrical glitch, but deep down I felt that it was something more. That moment stayed with me. Joining the list of inexplicable occurrences I'd experienced in that hotel, a different incident earlier this year had been even more unsettling. I remember it clearly. I just finished cleaning one room and was heading down a dim hallway toward the supply closet to grab fresh linens for my next task. As I walked, I noticed a woman in a white robe at the far end of the corridor. Her brown hair hung neatly at shoulder length, and her demeanor was calm and composed. There was nothing particularly unusual about her appearance, so I assumed she was simply returning to her room after visiting the pool or sauna. A few moments later, I checked my assignment list and saw that my next cleaning task was indeed in that same hallway. Recalling the woman I'd spotted earlier, I figured she must have entered that room. When I arrived at the door, I knocked gently and waited for a reply. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time, and stood there longer. But still, No response. Thinking she might not have heard me or could be in the bathroom, I slid my keycard into the lock and opened the door slightly, calling out to check if everything was all right. Silence greeted me. I stepped cautiously inside and scanned the space with a growing sense of apprehension. The bed was tidily made, the bathroom was empty, and there wasn't a single sign that anyone had been in the room at all. Panic crept in as I realized I'd unmistakably seen someone head toward this spot moments earlier. My chest tightened. An unnerving feeling washed over me as I backed out of the room and closed the door behind me with shaky hands. Outside in the hallway, my heart raced as I tried to make sense of what had happened. Later, when I shared the strange encounter with a co-worker, his reaction left me speechless. He didn't seem taken aback at all. In fact, he nodded knowingly and mentioned that other employees had seen the same woman before. That revelation left me shaken, but also strangely validated. It became clear that this wasn't an isolated experience. These occurrences had been happening here for years. Afterward, I began hearing more first-hand accounts from co-workers about strange happenings in various parts of the hotel. The one area that came up over and over in conversations was the basement. Originally intended for storage and maintenance, it was primarily used by staff to transport supplies away from guest areas via its maze-like back corridors. Dimly lit with narrow hallways marked by exposed pipes along the ceiling, the basement gave off an eerie vibe even during daylight hours. Its musty odor clung stubbornly to the air, despite ventilation efforts and frequent cleanings, leaving an uneasy atmosphere that made most employees avoid venturing down there alone unless absolutely necessary, especially at night. But of all the stories I've heard or experienced myself, one incident stands out vividly in my mind even years later. It was Thanksgiving night in 2018. Business was slow since most guests had opted to spend the holiday with family, creating an opportunity for staff to prepare for the upcoming Christmas season. One of our tasks involved retrieving decorations from storage in the basement so they could begin adorning the hotel's common areas in the days to follow. What happened that night cemented my unease about the hotel's reputation for being different. While I might have dismissed prior incidents as oddities or misunderstandings, that Thanksgiving night changed everything for me, and not in a way I can easily forget. I was tasked with retrieving some decorations, which meant heading down to the basement to find the boxes we needed. In the basement, there's one particular storage room that employees refer to as the dungeon. The nickname started as a joke, because the room is small, dimly lit, and surrounded by stark concrete walls, making it feel more like a utility chamber than a simple storage area. So over time, however, the name stuck, and not just for its appearance. Many employees feel uneasy in that room. The air is dense, heavier than anywhere else in the basement, and the oppressive silence has a way of unsettling you, especially if you're alone. That night, flashlight in hand, though the overhead lights were already on, I went down into the dungeon. The lighting in that room is often unreliable, with shadowy corners that seem to grow darker the longer you're there. I picked through the stacks of boxes carefully, each labeled with the names of different holiday decorations. After several minutes of searching, I finally located the box labeled for wreaths, which was exactly what management had asked for. I grabbed 2 boxes and turned toward the doorway to leave. It was at that exact moment I heard a voice, clear and unmistakable, whisper right next to my ear. "Wrong one." The voice wasn't faint or muffled as if someone were calling from down the hall. It was startlingly close, as though someone were leaning in and speaking directly to me. The words weren't menacing or angry, just calm and matter-of-fact, but their unexpectedness sent a jolt through me, freezing me in place. My body stiffened as I instinctively spun around, fully expecting to find another employee standing behind me. But there was no one. Not in the room, not in the doorway, and certainly not retreating down the hallway. I stood there, rooted to the spot, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My rational mind scrambled for an explanation, an echo from another part of the basement maybe, or perhaps my imagination playing tricks on me. I knew people said sound could behave strangely in enclosed spaces like this. Convincing myself it was no more than an odd acoustical quirk, I shoved aside my unease, picked up the boxes once more, and took them upstairs. Later, as I delivered the decorations to where they were being organized, one of the boxes was opened, and inside we found a wreath missing several key pieces. It couldn't be used. That detail lingered in my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. It added an unsettling weight to what I'd heard. Was that strange voice less of a figment and more of a warning? And if so, warning me of what? I didn't have an answer. What I did know was that after that night, I became noticeably more cautious whenever I had to work in the basement alone. Apparently, I wasn't alone in my unease about that space. Over time, I heard similar stories from co-workers, tales of phantom footsteps trailing behind them or fleeting movements glimpsed out of the corner of their eye when no one else was around. Some even described the unnerving sensation of being watched, a feeling all too familiar to me, despite security cameras consistently showing empty hallways. One story stood out in particular. A co-worker once shared his inexplicably eerie experience while preparing a romantic package in one of the guest rooms upstairs. Part of his job involved setting up candles for special occasions. On this particular evening, he had placed and lit several candles around a room before briefly stepping out to fetch extra towels from a supply closet down the hall. When he returned mere minutes later, every single candle had been extinguished, even though there wasn't any noticeable draft strong enough to snuff out flames. Thinking he might have been careless while lighting them the first time, he painstakingly relit each one and left once more to finish grabbing supplies. But when he came back again, all the candles were out again. This frustrating pattern repeated itself several times until he eventually gave up and left the candles unlit. Later that evening, after guests had arrived and checked into their room, they called down to the front desk to complain about how their candles weren't lit as requested, a claim that left him both puzzled and annoyed since he'd worked diligently to light them multiple times. When he recounted this encounter to other staff members, many nodded knowingly. Apparently, several had heard eerily similar stories over the years. Another tale frequently passed around involves Sam, a former groundskeeper who worked on the property for many decades. Sam was deeply committed to his work. He prided himself on maintaining immaculate landscaping, every hedge trimmed to perfection, every flower bed planted with careful symmetry. To many employees who knew him well, Sam treated the property almost like his personal sanctuary. Years ago, however, Sam suffered a fatal heart attack while working. The voice is often described as calm and male, offering simple phrases of approval or encouragement regarding the property's appearance. Reports of this voice are sporadic, occurring frequently enough to become part of the hotel's unofficial lore. Some staff members believe it's tied to the lingering spirit of Sam, a former employee renowned for his dedication. Others attribute the phenomenon to imagination or stress during long shifts, especially in the quiet outdoor areas. Regardless of the explanation, the story continues to circulate among employees, intertwining with the broader history of the land itself. The property where the hotel now stands was once farmland, owned by a family who cultivated crops and raised livestock there for over a century. Development began in the early 1990s, when the land was sold for a commercial project. Historical accounts suggest unusual events started shortly after the hotel opened, initially dismissed as minor coincidences. Over time, however, reports became more frequent and consistent, with certain areas like specific rooms, hallways, and service spaces repeatedly associated with peculiar incidents. One tragic event etched in the hotel's narrative occurred in 2007, when a woman drowned in a nearby wooded pond. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, but were unable to save her. Following this incident, several employees began witnessing a figure resembling her, described as a woman in a white robe, walking through hallways or near guest rooms late at night. The similarity between these sightings and my personal encounter in the corridor deeply affected me, fueling speculation among staff of a possible connection to the drowning. Whether this belief is accurate remains uncertain, yet the tale has become another layer in the hotel's growing collection of eerie stories. As years passed, these occurrences formed a pattern spanning multiple departments and generations of employees. While some dismissed the reports and focused on their work, others grew wary of particular parts of the building. Such experiences fostered a shared sense of curiosity and unease among staff, who came to believe the phenomena predated their employment. Informal notes on unexplained incidents gradually became a part of management's routine record-keeping. early event that still draws attention took place in the early 2000s. With the hotel newly opened at the time, housekeeping staff entered a guest room one morning, expecting it to be clean and untouched. It had been prepared the previous night and was not assigned to any guest. Instead, they found chaos. The bed linens pulled off, pillows scattered across the floor, and sheets twisted and disarranged. Maintenance checked for signs of forced entry or tampering with windows and locks, but found no anomalies. The unsettling scenario left employees puzzled and marked one of the first instances where serious contemplation about strange activity began. Prior to this incident, most oddities had been minor, a book falling from a shelf or light fixtures flickering unpredictably, but over time, an undeniable thread seemed to bind these events together. Gradually, individual encounters evolved into collective anecdotes, each contributing to the long-standing narrative of mysterious happenings within the hotel's walls. In the aftermath, people began observing patterns with greater care. Over the ensuing years, reports of inexplicable noises became increasingly common. Staff working late-night shifts occasionally heard the sound of footsteps in stairwells or hallways, even when security footage showed no signs of movement. Others described hearing doors creak open and shut in empty corridors. These occurrences were typically quiet and unassuming, but they happened frequently enough to spark conversations among employees during shift changes and staff meetings. Management tried to calm nerves, insisting the building was secure, and that such experiences were likely due to mechanical quirks or ordinary structural noises. Yet the volume of accounts continued to rise. Curiosity eventually inspired a handful of employees to conduct informal experiments, attempting to understand whether external sounds could provoke activity in specific spaces. One of the more notable attempts occurred in the same suite where shattered glassware had once been discovered. The team hypothesized that loud noises in nearby spaces might correlate with disturbances inside the suite, a theory aligned with earlier reports. To test this, one employee dropped a box filled with broken glass into a service area below the suite, creating an echo that resounded through adjacent hallways. Following this orchestrated noise, the employee observed quietly, expecting something unusual. Initially, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. The hall remained eerily still, and there were no observable disruptions. However, over the course of the next week, multiple employees reported an unsettling feeling of unease when entering that suite. Despite finding nothing tangible, many described the sensation as though an unseen presence occupied the room. The overwhelming discomfort was strong enough for some to report it to their supervisors. Nevertheless, with no clear evidence to act upon, management logged these accounts, but refrained from taking formal steps. Another recurring phenomenon involved significant temperature fluctuations in certain rooms. Guests sometimes complained their rooms felt unusually cold, despite thermostats being set to higher temperatures. Maintenance crews inspected the heating and ventilation systems repeatedly, but failed to identify any malfunctions that could account for these anomalies. On occasion, cleaning staff noted similar chilling conditions in these rooms, lending credibility to guest complaints and making it harder to dismiss them as subjective perceptions. Around this time, management began examining historical records tied to the property in search of potential explanations for these reports. Local archives revealed that for about 170 years before being sold to developers, the land functioned as farmland. During that period, several accidents had reportedly occurred, including injuries caused by heavy machinery and harsh weather exposure. While most details remained fragmented or anecdotal, mentions of such incidents appeared in old newspapers and community documents. These discoveries fueled speculation among some staff, who wondered if residual energy from these accidents might contribute to the unusual activity, particularly in areas of the hotel constructed directly atop former agricultural work sites. Despite these ongoing discussions within the staff ranks, daily hotel operations proceeded uninterrupted. Guests checked in and out without incident. Housekeeping services ran smoothly, and routine maintenance addressed standard wear and tear. Most visitors stayed blissfully unaware of the whispered stories spreading among employees. Conversations about peculiar events were kept internal. Management preferred avoiding unnecessary alarm or unintended public scrutiny. Still, within staff circles, Certain rooms and hallways gained reputations for their eerie associations. A notable turning point came when a guest who claimed to be a medium visited the hotel while traveling for a public engagement. Curious about the property's rumored activity, she specifically requested a room known for unusual reports. Intrigued and perhaps hoping for nothing conclusive, management granted her request. The woman stayed for 2 nights and gave her account to management upon checkout. She had sensed the presence of a young child occupying her room. She portrayed the presence as more playful than menacing, attributing it to minor disturbances like lights flickering, objects shifting position, and other odd occurrences. She emphasized that she didn't sense any malicious intent from whatever force she suspected was there. While some employees found her interpretation reassuring, others remained doubtful, skeptical of claims that lacked scientific verification. Her visit stirred renewed conversations among staff about the hotel's reputation, leading some to delve into the property's history out of curiosity, while others chose to avoid the topic altogether. Regardless of individual beliefs, the stream of unusual experiences persisted, becoming a staple of the workplace atmosphere. New hires quickly learned which areas of the building were considered peculiar, and over time, these tales became ingrained in the culture of the hotel. By the time I had been there for several years, it was evident that the stories weren't fading into obscurity. Instead, they evolved into an enduring narrative continually fueled by fresh incidents. These occurrences only reinforced the perception that unexplained events at the hotel stretched back long before the current staff's tenure. After the medium's visit, staff discussions on strange happenings grew more frequent, not because there was a sudden spike in activity, but because employees felt emboldened to share experiences they might have previously kept private. Although management refrained from making official statements regarding paranormal explanations, they continued to document maintenance reports and guest complaints that defied conventional resolution. Over time, these records unofficially charted a timeline that staff referenced when attempting to understand recurring patterns. One frequently discussed case involved an incident in the same large suite that had been central to earlier stories. Late one evening, after a housekeeping supervisor had inspected and confirmed the room's cleanliness, they locked it up for the night. But when staff arrived the next morning to prepare for incoming guests, they discovered subtle yet inexplicable changes. A chair typically positioned against the wall now sat angled near the center of the room, and a bedside lamp that had been turned off was glowing again. No signs of forced entry were found. The electronic lock showed no new access overnight, and maintenance verified that the door mechanism functioned properly throughout. These events, while individually minor, carried weight through their repetition over years, making them hard to dismiss completely. Patterns emerged from employee observations and reports, lights activating on their own, objects shifting locations, and faint sounds emanating from unoccupied spaces. Another story contributing to the hotel's mystique involved a maintenance technician working alone in a guest room during early morning hours to address a plumbing issue. After shutting off the water supply and gathering his tools, he stepped into the hallway for a wrench. Upon returning moments later, he noticed the bathroom light shining brightly, despite having clearly turned it off before leaving. Supposing it was a simple oversight, he switched the light off again and resumed his repair work. Shortly after, while kneeling by the sink, he heard an indistinct rustling sound behind him, akin to fabric moving softly. Turning quickly, he expected another employee entering the room but found nobody in sight. The doorway stood empty, and the hall outside remained quiet with no indication of activity. The technician completed his task and reported the strange experience to his supervisor, not due to believing in anything supernatural, but to ensure documentation of anything remotely unusual that could impact safety or facility operations. Although such incidents rarely reached dramatic proportions individually, their persistence over time underscored an undeniable thread of peculiar activity within the hotel's environment. The supervisor added a note to the maintenance log, where it joined a growing list of similar entries, detailing unexplained noises and irregularities with the lighting. Over time, these records began to reveal patterns that seemed too consistent to dismiss as mere coincidence. Alongside these instances, a handful of guests had also recounted strange experiences. Most of their observations were minor, televisions turning on by themselves, or the sound of footsteps in supposedly unoccupied neighboring rooms. Although guests seldom described these events as paranormal, many mentioned feeling inexplicably unsettled or having trouble sleeping without identifying any clear cause. The front desk staff generally manage such reports by offering room changes or complimentary services, which often resolved the issue without further complaint. However, one particular report had become a quiet legend among employees. It involved a family visiting during the winter holidays. According to the front desk log, the parents called late one night, concerned because their young child had insisted that someone was playing in their room after everyone else had gone to bed. Initially chalking it up to an overactive imagination, the parents grew uneasy when they woke the next morning to find toys that had been neatly arranged now scattered across the floor. What made this incident stand out was that housekeeping later confirmed no one had entered the family's room after cleaning it, and yet the toys had undeniably been moved. The family chose to cut their stay short, but did not request a refund or provide further details about what they experienced. Over the years, several renovations were undertaken at the hotel. Old lighting systems were replaced, carpets were exchanged for newer ones, and electronic locks with enhanced security features were installed. Management hoped that modernizing the building would resolve the mechanical issues, often blamed for earlier anomalies, such as faulty wiring or malfunctioning devices. While these upgrades did eliminate some problems, reports of strange occurrences persisted, suggesting that technical faults weren't the sole explanation. By the time I took up my current role at the hotel, stories of these odd happenings had become an informal part of workplace lore among long-serving staff. No one treated them as definitive proof of anything supernatural, but they were acknowledged with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. New employees were often taken aback by how many such incidents had been documented over the years. One of the most intriguing developments came when management decided to sift through old incident logs during a safety audit. What caught their attention was that many accounts of unusual activity seemed concentrated in specific areas of the property, particularly a large suite and sections of the building near the wooded land behind the hotel. While no official conclusions were drawn, this clustering of reports hinted at underlying patterns. Maintenance teams thoroughly inspected these problem areas, checking electrical systems, plumbing, and structural integrity, but no mechanical faults could be identified. Despite these efforts, eerie stories continued to emerge from time to time, keeping the hotel's enigmatic reputation alive. For example, a housekeeper reported hearing faint knocking sounds coming from inside a room she had just finished cleaning and securely locked. Upon reopening the door to investigate, she found no one there and nothing out of place. Another employee working an overnight shift recalled hearing the faint sound of running water in an empty bathroom that had already been inspected and deemed completely dry. Though the origins of these peculiar events remain uncertain, they continue to be quietly passed down through staff conversations, a reminder that some mysteries may never be fully explained. Brief and subtle moments like these may seem inconsequential to outsiders, but they contribute to a long-standing list of eerie occurrences documented over the years within the building. By all outward appearances, the hotel functions like any other. Guests check in, families celebrate, and employees attend to their responsibilities. Yet behind the facade of routine lies a history of unexplained events that linger in the shadows. And so concludes the tale of the hotel where I currently work. With hope, there won't be additional chapters to add anytime soon. Stay vigilant, dear guests. In 2017, I was 21 years old when I traveled to Germany with my friend who was 23 and my 20-year-old cousin. The trip was initiated because my friend wanted to visit her German relatives, yet felt uneasy about traveling solo. I suggested we explore the country together first to help her acclimate before meeting her family. Upon our arrival in Germany, we embarked on a side trip to Paris, spending 3 days immersed in typical tourist activities, exploring landmarks and mastering the train system. By the 4th day, it was time to return to Germany and stay in a small town approximately an hour outside Munich, at the final stop of the train line. We arrived close to midnight. The streets were deserted, and we spent an unnervingly quiet walk hauling our luggage in search of accommodations. Eventually, we came across a modest establishment called Happy Hotel, where we were given room 14. The room was simple enough. My friend and cousin shared the larger bed, while I took a smaller twin bed separated by a partial wall. That first night was far from restful. A string of relentless nightmares left me feeling depleted come morning. I awoke on edge, highly sensitive to every sound and movement, though I rationalized my unease as simple jet lag. Determined to make the most of the day ahead, we ventured out to explore. Under sunny skies, the town felt welcoming and idyllic. Though it was clear we stood out as tourists, the locals greeted us warmly and made an effort to converse in English. At one point, we even spotted cows being guided down a road, a quaint detail that emphasized just how far away we were from home. We spent hours admiring shops, taking in sights, and enjoying the slow rhythm of small-town life. Later that evening, back at the hotel, my friend prepared a traditional German meal as we gathered around to watch a thunderstorm sweep through the horizon, a serene moment that belied the unsettling experience waiting ahead. Settling into bed that night felt ordinary enough until I unexpectedly woke in the early hours. From my vantage point, I could see a mirror reflecting parts of our room, my friend peacefully sleeping in her bed among them. Initially, everything appeared normal. Then it began. A sharp headache struck without warning, followed by an unnervingly loud noise reminiscent of a table saw slicing through wood. My gaze returned to the mirror abruptly, but my friend was gone. Her bed lay disturbed, blankets tossed aside amid personal belongings like her watch and nightstand. Confused and increasingly alarmed, I turned toward my cousin, and the scenario repeated. A sudden burst of pain in my head accompanied that sharp noise once more, only this time she was missing as well. In her place sat an unfamiliar woman with blonde hair tied into a bun, staring at me with unrelenting intensity, an expression dripping with aggression and hatred. When I turned back toward the mirror again, another shift occurred. The reflection no longer resembled me but someone younger, with disheveled blonde hair and sheer terror written across their face. Disorientation clouded my thoughts before everything escalated further. The same blonde-haired woman launched herself toward me and pinned me down forcefully. She placed her hands over my mouth and nose, cutting off my air supply completely. I grappled desperately against her grip, but felt powerless, overwhelmed by suffocating pressure against my chest and face. Real fear consumed me as I struggled for breath. In my despair, I began faintly hearing my friend's voice, urgent yet distant, as she pleaded for me to wake up. The world seemed split between two forces tugging at me, her voice on one side and this horrifying struggle on the other. Bright light flickered intermittently before fully consuming my field of vision, and suddenly everything snapped into clarity. I found myself sitting up in bed, gasping for air. My chest heaved painfully as though crushed. Fire burned through my lungs relentlessly while waves of nausea clashed with an intense headache pulsing through my temple. It felt as real as any waking moment, but where does the boundary between dreams and reality begin? I climbed out of bed and rummaged through my backpack, desperately searching for ibuprofen. When I couldn't find it right away, panic set in. Frustration took over, and I ended up dumping the entire contents of my bag onto the floor, frantically kneeling to find the bottle. It was then that I realized my friends were still sound asleep around me. Overwhelmed, I broke down. Tears streamed uncontrollably as I sat trembling amongst my friends and cousin, scattered belongings surrounding me. When I finally located the ibuprofen, I was shaking so badly that I couldn't open the bottle. My friend, woken by the commotion, stepped in to help. She handed me the pills and stayed by my side until I calmed down. Eventually, we all ended up lying together in the same bed. But even with their support, sleep never came for me that night. The next morning, I told them everything that had happened. My first instinct was to pack up and leave immediately, but my friends persuaded me to spend one more night before heading back. That evening, though, I refused to sleep in that small bed again. My friend volunteered to take it instead. Around midnight, things took a strange turn. She woke up and quietly climbed into the larger bed next to us. When I asked what had happened, she said she felt something pressing down on her chest while lying alone in that bed. That confirmation of something unexplainable sent chills through me. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, gripping onto consciousness until the first sign of daylight. As soon as we could, we boarded the earliest train out of town. Since that night, I've never experienced anything remotely similar, and I hope I never will again. Fast forward a few years later, I found myself in a completely different scenario, but with eerily familiar feelings. About 2 or 3 years ago, while staying at a hotel with my mom in Carlsbad, those same uneasy sensations crept up on me. It was subtle this time. Nothing tangible or evident that I could point to as the cause. The room appeared perfectly normal. Everything was in its place. But beneath the surface, something felt off. Still, I tried to push aside the discomfort, chalking it up to my tendency to get paranoid in unfamiliar places, especially hotels. Later that evening, as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, an unusual sensation made me freeze. My eyes were closed, but warmth and light seemed to press against my eyelids. Initially, I assumed it must be headlights from a car passing outside, simple and logical. But then it occurred to me how strange it was that the light wasn't fading or flickering. It remained steady and unwavering. Curiosity got the better of me, so I opened my eyes and instantly froze. Floating above my bed was a glowing orange orb. For a moment, I couldn't do anything but stare at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The orb wasn't faint or hazy. It was vividly clear and overwhelmingly real. Warm hues of orange and yellow radiated from it, bathing the entire room in an otherworldly glow that stretched across walls and ceiling alike. I shifted slightly in disbelief, propping myself up for a better look. Yet the orb lingered exactly where it was, perfectly steady and unfazed by my movements. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, it began to move. The motion was slow and deliberate, as it spiraled through the room with eerie precision. It didn't flicker like a rogue light reflection, or flare like a faulty device. This thing moved. After gracefully tracing a path across the space, it drifted toward one wall and disappeared straight through it. The room plunged into darkness, leaving me sitting there in stunned silence, trying to process what I had just witnessed. My mind raced with questions, unsure whether any of it could possibly have been real. Desperate for confirmation or even just reassurance, I leaned over to wake my mom. Groggy and half asleep, she brushed off my question about seeing anything unusual and urged me to go back to sleep. Frustrated but undeterred, I climbed out of bed and inspected every inch of the room for answers. The blackout curtains were shut tightly with no gaps for outside light to infiltrate. There weren't any devices or equipment that could have projected what I'd seen either. The strangest part? After everything, the orb's presence, its baffling movements, when I finally laid back down in bed, sleep came without struggle or fear. To this day, I have no explanation for what transpired that night in Carlsbad or during that earlier trip with my friends. But one thing is certain, both experiences left a mark on me that I'll never forget and never want to relive again. Reflecting on that night, I find it strange that the aftermath of the experience felt more surreal than the event itself. You'd expect something like that to leave me rattled, sleepless, even anxious, but instead I slept deeply. It wasn't until I woke up the next morning that the memory came rushing back, and I was struck by how calm I had remained at the time. Most people I've shared this with brushed it off as a hallucination, yet it didn't feel that way to me at all. What I experienced was vivid, three-dimensional, and unmistakably real, at least from my perspective. It wasn't some fleeting shadow or trick of the mind. It felt tangible, as if it existed right there in the room with me. I was fully awake when it happened, with no haze or uncertainty clouding my perception. To this day, I can't explain it and haven't encountered anything similar since. But I'd be curious to know if anyone has experienced something like this or could shed light on what it was. It all began around 2:10 a.m., when 5 of us drove into Arai Colony, a neighborhood in India that takes on an entirely different character at night. By day, it's just another stretch of greenery, nothing out of the ordinary. But after sundown, the atmosphere shifts in an almost palpable way. Locals say it's haunted, claiming strange occurrences mar its nights. Whether or not you believe in such things is personal, but there's no denying the place carries an eerie weight after dark. We ventured deeper into the area until we reached the gate of the Imperial Palace, an abandoned 5-star hotel left to crumble over time. The structure feels oddly misplaced, as though it belonged somewhere else entirely. We pulled up in front of its rusted gate and stopped the car. The headlights illuminated the entrance clearly. Everything ahead of us was visible. This wasn't a scene shrouded in darkness or uncertainty. For a moment we just sat there quietly, absorbing our surroundings. That's when I saw him, a guard standing behind the gate dressed in a blue uniform and flanked by 2 dogs. He wasn't trying to evade notice. He stood calmly, simply watching us with an air of detachment. It struck me enough that I immediately pointed him out. But instead of affirming what I saw, my friends reacted with confusion. One by one, all 4 insisted there was no guard standing there. They could see the 2 dogs, sure, but to them the space where I clearly saw a man was empty. At first I assumed they were teasing me, playing some kind of bizarre joke. But their reactions didn't feel playful or feigned. They were genuinely perplexed and insistent. I tried to convince them otherwise, pointing out the details, the uniform, his posture, his stillness, but they kept shaking their heads. All 5 of us stared at the exact same spot, under the same car headlights, yet somehow we were perceiving entirely different realities. It was unsettling, and as the argument dragged on for about 2 minutes, a sense of discomfort took root in me that I couldn't shake. The energy shifted from mere confusion to something deeper, something disquieting. How could we all be in the same space, looking at the same scene but see 2 such different versions of it? I couldn't stay there any longer. I started the car and drove away, all of us tense and on edge, until we were about 1 kilometer down the road. That's when we stopped again to hash it out further. They stood firm in their claim. There had been no guard. And I stood firm in mine. There absolutely had been. Neither side budged. Eventually they convinced me to turn around and go back for another look, to confirm what we had, or hadn't, seen once and for all. Hesitantly, I reversed course and retraced our path to the gate of the abandoned hotel. We pulled into the exact same spot as before, with the headlights casting the same bright glare over the metal bars of the gate and its surroundings. This time we sat silently, waiting and watching closely. At first nothing happened. The gate stood empty. But after a short passage of time that felt much longer than it was, he appeared, the same guard in his blue uniform, standing between the gates alongside the same 2 dogs. Only now, unlike before, there was no disagreement. All 5 of us saw him clearly this time and acknowledged him without hesitation. He looked just as ordinary as he had earlier, no spectral glow or distortion to suggest he wasn't real. He had even shifted his posture slightly and was staring down at his phone as if he were casually passing another uneventful night on duty. To this day, I can't explain what occurred during those few hours at Art Colony, or why my friends and I initially perceived such strikingly different things. We watched him closely and eventually decided to leave. To this day, we still can't make sense of what occurred in those first couple of minutes. I remember seeing someone nobody else could see at the time for reasons we can't explain. Yet when we came back, he was suddenly visible to everyone as if he had been there the whole time. Truly bizarre. Hey everyone, it's Mort here. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. I want to take a moment to apologize for the lack of a video last Tuesday and the disruptions to the usual schedule this week. A teacher recently quit at my daughter's school, and honestly it threw my entire routine into chaos. It's been quite a challenge trying to manage everything while still creating content on time. I deeply appreciate your patience and support, and things should be getting back on track now. Speaking of schedules, next week will be Nature Week. You can look forward to stories featuring isolated areas, deep woods, eerie cabins, haunted forests, and wrapping up with tales about cryptids. It's shaping up to be an exciting lineup, so be sure to tune in. A big thank you goes out to my amazing members and patrons. You'll see their names featured on the screen as usual. Until next time, take care.